could cost the American people dearly in the future. The House bill with respect to capital formation, which is labeled a jobs bill but goes more to fundamentally change security laws, is in effect another regulatory race to the bottom. There has not been a normal committee process in terms of weighing this legislation. These are complicated details. The interaction of the securities laws and many different securities laws have not been sorted out, analyzed, and as a result we are rushing to justice or rushing to conclusion. Hasty deregulation has repeatedly been the source of financial crises. The savings and loan crisis, the Enron era crises, the Great Recession of 2008, and the list goes on. And those who were impacted by these crises, who lost their savings or dealt with cleaning them up, experts in this field and many more have come out in strong opposition to the House proposal. From the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Mary Shapiro, to the North American Securities Administrators Association, those state officials charged with enforcing securities laws, state regulators, auditors, financial analysts, pension fund managers, the AARP are among those who have spoken out against this flawed legislation and supported my efforts to protect investors. This capital formation bill is fundamentally flawed and should not become law in its present form. It undercuts and dilutes investor protections and has no real requirements to protect American jobs in order to use these new procedures. That's what's so ironic. We have a jobs bill, but actually I see nothing in this bill that requires creating American jobs to earn the benefits of this bill. And it is, I think, again, misnomered as a jobs bill. In addition to the substitute amendment I offered with Senators Landrieu and Levin and others that received a majority vote earlier this week, I offered an amendment that we'll be voting on later today to clarify the shareholder trigger for Exchange Act reporting so that all companies count their actual shareholders so they cannot avoid periodic reporting requirements. Adoption of this amendment would achieve one of the stated goals of the legislation, which is ostensibly to have more companies in a transparent market disclosing and or listing on stock exchanges. That was the whole essence of this IPO on-ramp. Encourage more people to go public so they can disclose information to shareholders so the market can follow them, so that investment advisors can advise about purchasing the stocks on the market. Now, this is one glaring loophole with respect to my proposed amendment, but frankly, too many others remain, and I have grave concerns about the impact this underlying bill will have on the middle class. Backers say it's needed because initial public offerings are down since the 1990s. They blame regulation, ignoring evidence that the dot-com bubble bursting, which shook the confidence of many in these new IPOs that are coming on the market quickly with huge multiples in their prices as they come on the market and then quickly disappearing and leaving the scene altogether. And, of course, the biggest financial collapse since the Great Depression beginning in 2008 and lingering with us today has shaken the confidence and, frankly, shaken the business calculation of many small businesses who really are looking to expand when they see the demand out there for their products. And if the demand's there, they will, even in this environment, go forward with initial public offerings. And they also repeatedly blame the lack of IPO on accounting costs and all the other routines that were brought upon by Sarbanes-Oxley. They conveniently ignore that the single largest cost, and by a large multiple, is not the Sarbanes-Oxley 404 audit costs or the attorney costs, they're the investment bankers' fees. And there's nothing in this legislation that will affect those fees whatsoever. In the case of Groupon, for example, the investment bankers were paid 28 times what the auditors were paid. And if you ask the shareholders holding on to stock whether they have solid auditing practices going forward to ensure their investment is being wisely used, I think they'd say they prefer that than paying large fees to investment bankers. In the case of LinkedIn, the underwriters were paid 18 times what the auditors were. Groupon's paid their accountants and auditors $1.5 million, and their investment bankers received $42 million. So the notion that these Sarbanes-Oxley auditing costs and accounting procedures are really what's stopping a business person from deciding to go ahead ignores the fact that compared to the investment banking fees, which they'll still have to pay, these costs are somewhat insignificant in comparison. Theoretically, this bill is supposed to promote the flow of capital to emerging businesses. But in practice, it would likely promote and continue to promote fees paid to investment bankers and others to bring these companies public. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's nothing in this underlying legislation that's going to require discounts because of the reductions in accounting costs. There's nothing in this legislation that will change that dynamic. It could, however, this legislation, give insiders more ways to manipulate the market while average investors are left out in the cold. There is a difference between cutting red tape and allowing insiders to cut corners, undoing the common sense safeguards that protect people who play by the rules. The House bill lowers standards for taking a company public and lowers standards for protecting the public from investment fraud. This so-called IPO on-ramp desperately needs an off-ramp through more careful consideration by the Senate or the House in conference so that we can improve some provisions which have great merit but need improvement. This bill would allow very large companies with up to $1 billion in revenues per year to avoid financial transparency and auditing disclosures designed to ensure that they are not manipulating their books, while enjoying lighter regulation for up to 5 years after the IPO. If this unbalanced bill becomes law without these needed improvements, it could weaken oversight of Wall Street, oversight that in the past has provided investors protections that are extremely important. Again, there is merit to the idea of giving small startup companies more financing options, but the devil's in the details, and the way this bill was written and packaged could actually have the opposite effect and ultimately make it harder to raise capital. It opens up the spigot to general solicitation and mass marketing of what traditionally have been private securities offerings. And we can fully expect to have senior citizens and others through nightly cable advertisements, through billboards, cold called by brokers or other individuals telling them about the special opportunities for investing their cash. And many could fall for some of these. Retail investors can be solicited now through a Reg A process to raise capital for small business. They'll hear the pitch, make your investment now and get rich. And again, there is potential for expanding the use of Regulation A. It's on the books already of the Securities and Exchange Commission, but not without safeguards. For example, as the bill is currently drafted, these solicitations can be made without audited financial statements. And I think as a point of departure, if you're trying to sell a security, you should at least have audited financials of the company you're soliciting on behalf of. Now, the crowdfunding amendment, I hope, will be improved dramatically by the work of Senator Merkley and Bennett and Senator Brown. We'll be voting on that later today, too. It is a substantial improvement. But I think even they themselves admit that this is an experiment, and it perhaps could be improved even further. But I commend them and salute them for what they have done, and I hope our colleagues accept the amendment and move forward. We have, over the last few days, spent a great deal of time talking about the shortcomings in this legislation. And with the exception of the proposals before us, many of these shortcomings still exist, and I think will lead potentially to difficulties and harm to investors. People understand investing is risky. You try to make an informed choice, and you win some and you lose some. But most Americans would agree that U.S. financial markets work best when investors have access to timely, comprehensive, and accurate public information that allows people to make solid investment decisions. In fact, one of the principles of a competitive market, if you take the Economics 101 textbook, is perfect information. That's the assumption for competitive markets, perfect information. Well, there's never perfect information, but there has to be adequate information. Otherwise, it's not a market, it's a casino. This legislation undermines some of the decades-long protections that we have in place to provide at least adequate information to investors. By stripping away auditing standards and giving the investing public less information in almost every setting, sophisticated players and investment banks will have all the advantages. The average investor will be operating in much more challenged circumstances. Middle-class Americans will be particularly affected. As USA Today noted, banks that manage IPOs will be able to use inside access to past financial results to dominate research on new companies with incentives to promote their firm's banking clients. The American people want big banks and large companies to play fair and comply with the basic rules and responsibilities that go with being a public company. That's not too much to ask. I believe that history will judge this misnamed bill quite harshly. Instead of rushing to pass this bill, we should be working together to protect the interests and economic well-being of the American public. We should be focused on creating jobs and helping working families. And this bill does not, in my estimate, do that. And indeed, ironically, it could harm our constituents by shattering their faith, and it's been tested quite recently by the financial crisis and other crises, in the market, rather than reinforcing their confidence that they will be protected while they participate in the market. I believe we're capable of writing better legislation without sacrificing important investor protections. And I hope that we can go forward. I'm disappointed that the substitute amendment authored by myself and Senator Landrieu and Levin was not accepted. As such, I would urge, when we get to final passage, that people think very seriously about the consequences of this bill. Despite the efforts of Senator Merkley and Senator Bennett and others, Senator Brown of Massachusetts, despite my efforts, I'm afraid that the final version of this legislation will not protect investors as it should, and therefore should be rejected. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield the floor. Any time remaining in the quorum call be equally divided between my Republican colleagues and my Democratic colleagues.
There's objection. So ordered.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to yield myself 5 minutes to discuss the Jobs Act.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I think we are on the verge of doing something very, very constructive in this body, something very, very constructive for our economy, for the American people, for economic growth, and for job creation. And after a Congress that has thus far been a little frustrating for the lack of progress we've made on this front, today is a very, very big day. We've got a chance to pass a bill that has passed the House overwhelmingly with a huge bipartisan majority, a bill that the President of the United States has said he will sign into law. We've got a chance to pass this, to have it signed into law, and to thereby enable small and growing businesses across America to have greater access to the capital they need to grow, to hire new workers, to help expand this economy, to really make some progress at a time when we need it badly. The bill that I'm talking about, of course, is the Jobs Act. It has passed the House 390 to 23, overwhelming majority, and it consists of a series of component measures, which I'll talk about a little bit in some detail, each of which has either passed the full House almost unanimously or at least committee by overwhelming majority. So there's very broad bipartisan support. It is important, however, to get to this point, we need to defeat the amendment offered by my friend and colleague, whom I respect a great deal, the senator from Rhode Island, who's offering an amendment that would have devastating unintended consequences, an amendment that doesn't merely weaken the progress that we're going to make with this bill, but would actually take us backwards from where we are today. And the way in which it would do that, and I doubt that this is the intent, but I am sure that this is the consequence of this amendment. If it were enacted, this amendment would cause companies that are organized as private companies, for good and sufficient reason, many for many years, they choose to be private companies because it's what's best for their business, their employees, and their customers. It would force many of them to become public companies against their will, because a change in the rules and the regulations by which we count the number of shareholders, as the amendment from the gentleman from Rhode Island, the change that it would cause would trigger this change in the status of these companies, having enormously detrimental impact on many, many companies, raising their costs of compliance dramatically, making them less profitable. I'm very concerned, for instance, among the many ways that this could happen, one could be through ESOPs, the employee stock ownership plans. I know the gentleman from Rhode Island believes that they would not trigger this. I think that it's very likely that they would. Not only would this force private companies to go public against their will, but it would discourage the creation of employee ownership in companies. And I think the last thing we want to do is discourage a very constructive way of compensating employees. So if we can defeat the Reid Amendment, then we can move on to, I think we'll have another amendment that will deal with crowdfunding. I don't know whether that passes or not, but either way, we'll be able to expand the opportunity of small companies to raise capital through crowdfunding mechanisms. And then we'll have a final passage vote on what I think might be the most pro-growth measure that this body will consider perhaps this whole year. Let me walk through a couple of specific. This is a chart that just shows a sampling of the organizations and institutions that support this bill. It's a wide range of businesses and business associations, folks that are in the business of launching new companies, of growing small companies. It's a long list. This is an incomplete subset of that list. And I think this is an important point that I want to make, and that is that there is a very, very vast range of investor protections that are completely unaddressed, completely unaffected by this legislation. The legislation is actually modest in the regulations that it changes, and the categories that it leaves in place to protect investors who are choosing to invest in companies, be they public or private, are really quite extensive. A whole range of anti-fraud provisions that remain in full force or unaffected. A full range of SEC disclosure and reporting obligations that remain entirely still in full force. Governance rules that are unaffected by any of this legislation. Proxy statements, reporting obligations. We have a very extensive body of law and regulation that very precisely controls all kinds of reporting and disclosure requirements designed to protect investors. it all stays in place. Investors will remain very well protected if this legislation is enacted. I want to touch on the three things that I think I'm most excited about, and I'll acknowledge my bias. These are three bills that I introduced with Democratic co-sponsors here in the Senate, each of which has been rolled up into this package, including, in addition to the crowdfunding piece that I alluded to earlier, and a bill introduced by Senator Thune and others that is also part of this package. One of the pieces in this jobs package that's very constructive is a bill that I introduced with Senator Tester. This is a bill that takes the existing Regulation A in the securities law, the body of law. Regulation A allows companies to issue a security in a streamlined regulatory fashion. It streamlines the process, it reduces costs somewhat, and the problem is the current limit is only $5 million, making it not very practical for the vast majority of companies. Our bill would take that limit to $50 million and make this an option to raise capital and grow a business that would be available to far more companies. A second piece that I introduced with Senator Carper, and for which I'm very grateful to Senator Carper for his work, is to lift the permissible number of shareholders that a small privately held business can have without triggering the full, very expensive and onerous SEC compliance regime. Our bill would take that from a current level of 500 up to 2,000, and there are many, many companies throughout Pennsylvania, across the country, that are successful, they're thriving, they're growing, but they've got a number of shareholders that's bumping up against that limit. They're close to 500. They need to raise capital. They don't want to go public, and they've got plenty of people who'd like to invest in their successful business so that they can grow, but they can't do it because they're so close to the threshold. We would lift that threshold to 2,000 so that they can raise more money in the private markets, which is available to them. And then finally, what is in some ways a centerpiece of this legislation in my mind, and that's a bill that I introduced with Senator Schumer, and I thank him for his work on this. This is a bill that facilitates going public. When a company reaches that point in its growth where, in order to grow further, in order to hire more workers, in order to expand, it needs to become a publicly traded company, we make it more affordable for more companies to do that so they can do it sooner, they can grow sooner, they can hire the additional workers sooner. We do it with what we call an on-ramp. It's a process by which a company, if it has less than $1 billion in sales, less than $750 million in market float, such a company would be able to do a public offering without being subject to all of the most expensive parts of the SEC regulatory regime. They would be required to comply with a big majority of all of the existing reporting requirements, but there'd be some pieces, especially Section 404B of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is extremely complex and expensive to comply with. They wouldn't have to fully comply with that for 5 years or until they reached $1 billion in sales or $750 million in market float, whichever came first. So what we're really doing with this part of the Jobs Act is we're giving small and growing companies an opportunity to grow into the ability to afford the most expensive regulation to which they would be applied. Nobody's exempted permanently. Everybody who goes public would be subject to the full panoply of regulations within 5 years or sooner if they grow faster, and it's only available to companies that have sales, as I said, less than $1 billion. But that describes a great number of companies, and I can tell you from personal experience, when a company is approaching that threshold of asking themselves, should we go public? We could grow, we could use the capital, we could deploy it to hire more workers, we could make constructive use of it. They also have to weigh the cost. And the cost of compliance right now is huge. And we have seen a huge drop-off in the number of IPOs. We've seen a huge extension in the period of time between the successful launch of a company and the moment that they do an IPO. We've seen that lengthen dramatically since we passed Sarbanes-Oxley. It's in part because it's so expensive to comply. And so what we'll be doing if we pass this legislation today, which I certainly hope we will, we'll be making it a little bit more affordable for these companies to make that decision sooner, which means hiring workers sooner, which means growing sooner, which means more growth for our economy, more opportunities for all of the people that we represent. So I am very optimistic. I'm really very pleased that we have been able to pull together such broad bipartisan support, this overwhelming vote in the House, the endorsement of the President of the United States, the support and cooperation with individual Democratic senators who've co-sponsored key pieces of this legislation. I do think it's equally important that we defeat the Reid Amendment so that we don't actually go backwards in this process and have the unintended consequence of forcing currently private companies to become public against their will, forcing them to incur all kinds of costs that are actually counterproductive. But if we can do that today, then I think we can pass this legislation. We know the President of the United States will sign it. We should do it as soon as we can. And I just want to thank all my colleagues who've played a role in advancing us to the point we're at today. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Recognized.
Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
senator from Illinois.
I ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
And how much time is remaining in the debate on this measure?
$23 minutes total, 18 minutes on the majority side.
Thank you, Madam President. I see the floor is vacant, and I assume the time is being taken from both sides at this moment.
In the quorum call, the time is being charged equally. Right now, it is being charged to the majority party.
Thank you. Then I'll try to fill that time with something interesting. Madam President, the United States has the best markets in the world. Because of strong regulation and oversight by the Securities and Exchange Commission and other agencies, our markets are transparent and investors get accurate, detailed information. 100 million Americans depend on the strong, regulated market when they are making their savings for retirement or college. This is a creation that began back after the Great Depression when Franklin Roosevelt said that we needed to establish the appropriate regulatory agencies to set the economy on the right track and keep it there. Strong oversight has helped pension fund managers who count on safety and transparency so they can provide pension benefits to millions of American retirees. And investors from around the world bring their money here because of our investor protections. Yet the Senate is considering today a House-passed capital formation bill that rolls back the very protections that make our markets the best in the world. Now, supporters of this bill claim that investors will just jump at the opportunity to invest in a company as soon as we reduce disclosure, auditing, and accounting standards. They say this is a perfect way to create jobs. But why should investors choose to invest in companies under conditions that do less to protect their money? Why should investors who were burned during the dot-com crash put more capital in companies that are exempt from the same rules we put in place to ensure it would never happen again? Why would investors who were left with nothing after the financial crisis because of risky behavior by executives with golden parachutes find companies exempt from compensation standards more attractive? The answer is they won't. And the ones that do will be more exposed to deceit and fraud. The result won't be more jobs. It will be less transparency, less accountability. Professor John Coates of Harvard Law School agrees, and here's what he said. The proposals here not only generate front-page scandals, but reduce the very thing they are being promoted to increase, job growth. Listen to what SEC Chief Accountant Lynn Turner said. The proposed legislation is a dangerous, risky experiment with U.S. capital markets. I do not believe it will add jobs, but may certainly result in investor loss. The House-passed bill, as written, won't create jobs, but let me tell you what it will do. It would exempt firms with more than $1 billion in revenue. That's 90% of the newly public companies. More than $1 billion in annual revenue exempted from the standards that help ensure audits based on facts, not on who is managing the auditor's contract. These are the same internal controls that we just adopted after Enron, after we were burned there, after investors lost their money, after pension funds lost their investments, after people lost their jobs. We set up standards and said let it never happen again. Now, in this euphoria, we are going to repeal the Enron standards for these companies. This bill would allow companies to use billboards and cold calls to lure unsophisticated investors with the promise of making a quick buck investing in new companies. According to the New York Times, it will allow anyone with an idea to post that idea online and raise $1 million without ever providing financial statements. This is a scam. How many times have you picked up your cell phone to see there's a Nigerian opportunity out there? Be prepared after this bill passes. They won't be from Nigeria. They may be from next door. And we are giving them the opportunity to ask people all across America for their hard-earned savings on investments that are not backed up with financial statements. Last Friday, SEC Commissioner Aguilar joined the chairman of the SEC, Mary Shapiro, in raising concerns about this House-passed bill. Isn't that fair warning that we ought to at least have a hearing on this bill before it passes? I ask unanimous consent to submit Commissioner Aguilar's statement for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Commissioner Aguilar said he shares concerns expressed by many that provisions of this bill would be a boon to boiler room operators, Ponzi schemers, bucket shops, and garden variety fraudsters by enabling them to cast a wider net and make securities law enforcement that much more difficult. Others have raised concern. The North American Securities Administrators Association, the Consumer Federation of America, the Americans for Financial Reform, the Council of Institutional Investors, securities experts like Professor John Coffey and former SEC Chief Accountant Lynn Turner, the AARP, concerned that seniors will be bilked out of their savings with these phony solicitations for companies that may not even exist. I share their concerns. I believe there is a path forward to protect investors and make it easier for small firms to come up with capital. Several of my colleagues had a substitute amendment, Senator Jack Reed, Senator Carl Levin, Senator Mary Landrieu, which would have done just that, made it easier to raise capital, but kept the safeguards in place. It was defeated, virtually on a party line vote. It was defeated. It would have preserved the Dodd-Frank say-on-pay provisions to allow investors to weigh in if executives are getting exorbitant compensation and golden parachutes. The amendment would have prohibited companies from advertising and selling stock to the unsophisticated, the unsuspecting investors. It would have included minimum requirements for crowdfunding websites so investors aren't blindly giving money to someone with a good-looking website that promises a good return that will never, ever happen. In short, the amendment would have responded to investors' concerns, the very same investors some of my colleagues claim the underlying bill will encourage to invest. And that's not all it would have done. The amendment also included a reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank, which makes loans to major companies and smaller companies too who want to export American-made products made by American workers. The reauthorization increased the bank's lending cap to $140 billion. This is the same Export-Import Bank that received bipartisan support in the Banking Committee and was reported out on a voice vote. A similar reauthorization was introduced by a Republican the last time around in 2006, passed the Senate without even the requirement of a record vote. However, yesterday, both the Landrieu-Reed-Levin amendment, which was a substitute, that included the Export-Import Bank reauthorization, and the Cantwell, Senator Maria Cantwell amendment, failed to obtain enough votes to invoke cloture, mostly on a party line vote. 2 Republicans voted to extend the Export-Import Bank authorization. 2. This is a bank which gives our companies in America a fighting chance around the world to compete with those companies in other countries that are subsidized by their government. We have the Export-Import Bank to help our companies, companies in my state like Boeing and Caterpillar, good-paying jobs right here in America, sustained by exports, helped by the Export-Import Bank, defeated on the floor of the United States Senate. Only 2 Republican senators would step up and vote for that bank. And it used to be non-controversial. We did it because we knew it was so good for our economy. It turned out to be a partisan issue. Too many things turn out to be partisan issues on the floor of the Senate lately, and that's the latest casualty. It is clear that politics and the theoretical jobs created by a bill that significantly reduces investor protections are more important to some of my colleagues than the real jobs that would have been created by the Export-Import Bank. This bank is responsible for supporting 288,000 American jobs at more than 2,700 U.S. companies. You would think it would have won more than 2 Republican votes. 113 of these companies are in my state. 80 of them are smaller businesses. One of the companies, Holland LP in Crete, Illinois, employs 250 people and completed a major export transaction with assistance from the Export-Import Bank. Holland was able to sell 2 complete in-track welding systems to a company in Brazil. The CEO of Holland said without the Export-Import Bank, this transaction would have not come to life. So that's how Export-Import Bank can help a company in my state and other companies all around the United States. I have to say there'll be an amendment offered soon, this afternoon, within the hour, the Merkley-Bennett-Scott-Brown amendment. It's bipartisan. It would allow small businesses to raise up to $1 million through crowdfunding websites, but put in protections for investors. from those posing as a business and selling a lot more hope than substance. The amendment would require all crowdfunding websites to register with the SEC. That's a step in the right direction. It is one of the most important elements that needs to be changed in this bill. Out of about 8 elements, it's the only one that we are likely to address this afternoon. I also urge my colleagues to support the amendment by Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, requiring the SEC to revise the definition of holder of record. I will tell you that the financial industry has been working overtime to beat this amendment. They've been on the phones calling everybody saying stop the Reed amendment. According to John Coffey, professor at Columbia Law School, the shareholder of record concept is archaic and it can be gamed. State securities regulators also share that same concern. The American Securities Administrators Association said in a recent letter it makes little sense to exclude any investor from the count of beneficial holders. The Reed Amendment would require the SEC to update the definition of holder of record to revise an outdated definition that could actually hide the true number of shareholders that a company might have. I believe the bipartisan Merkley-Bennett and Reed amendments will significantly improve parts of this bill, but it still doesn't make this a good bill. That is why I'm prepared to vote no on final passage. This bill, as much as any bill we've ever considered on the Senate floor, should have at least had a hearing. We should have at least brought in some expert witnesses. I will tell you, we will rue the day that we ran this thing through the House and Senate without the appropriate oversight. I can almost predict to you, having seen this happen time and again, that there will come a time after we pass this bill when we start hearing from Americans who are being lured into phony investments, losing their life savings and their retirement in the process, when we will step back and say, my goodness, how did that ever happen? Well, just remember, on March 22nd, 2012, we had a chance to make a difference, to slow down and stop this bill until there was an adequate hearing, until we put the safeguards in place which Americans deserve. I am not against investment. I know there is risk associated with it, but we have said since 1932, under the creation of the Securities and Exchange Commission, we owe the Americans, when they make a decision about an investment, some basic things. Make sure the salesman is telling the truth, and make sure what that salesman said can be backed up with audited financial statements. We can all remember the stories about people that used to blow into town selling penny stocks and $5 stocks, and unsuspecting investors losing their savings as these folks caught the next train out of town. We don't need to return to that in the name of job creation. If we are creating the jobs of new charlatans who are offering these investments, these are not the kind of jobs America should encourage. I believe the House-passed bill should be defeated today. I believe we should take the time to get it right, listen to the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, put the protections in the law so that we can move forward with a bill that all of us can be proud of. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Oregon.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to address the amendment on crowdfunding that we'll be considering shortly here on the floor of the Senate. Specifically, the goal is to create a solid foundation for the success of enabling Americans to invest in startup companies, to invest in small companies through the Internet, and to do so in a fashion that does not result in predatory scams, but instead results in capital formation that helps small business thrive across our nation. Now, the House bills that came over to us has crowdfunding provisions that are simply a pathway to predatory scams, a paved highway to predatory scams. What do I mean by that? Well, they say basically that a company seeking to raise investment capital doesn't have to give any financial information of any kind about the company. And if they do provide information, they don't have to have any accountability for the accuracy of that information. And by the way, they can hire people to pump their stock, and that's okay under the law. In other words, everything you associate with the worst boiler rooms, the worst pump and dump schemes, is made legal by the House legislation. And that's why we need to fix this here on the floor of the Senate. We lay out a provision that says if you raise less than $100,000, you as the CEO assert the accuracy of the information you're putting out. Simple financial statements. If you raise a larger amount of funds, you proceed to have an accountant-reviewed statement that you vouch for. If you raise yet more funds, higher level of funds, then you have an audited financial statement. So it adjusts it in degrees, streamlines it to the appropriate level based on the amount of investment you're asking for. This amendment says then that the directors and officers take responsibility for the accuracy of that information. And that gives investors a great deal more confidence that what they're reading is actually truly the case. And that's a foundation for successful investment. Now, there are many folks across the country who've been looking at these crowdfunding positions, these different measures, and I thought I'd read from a letter from Matavi, a crowdfunding intermediary based out of North Carolina. They have written and said on the House bill, the crowdfunding language in the House bill lacks critical investor protection features, does not require offerings to be conducted through an intermediary, which opens the door to fraudulent activity. It does not require appropriate disclosures or inspections. The bill does not require the issuer to inform investors of dilution risk or capital structure. Continues, crowdfunding is premised on openness. Without disclosure, investors cannot protect themselves or accurately price the securities that they are buying. If issuers are not willing to provide information over and above what is required, the House language does not provide investors with other alternatives short of giving up on crowdfunding altogether. They then comment on the bipartisan amendment that we're presenting today here on the floor of the Senate, and they note, it strikes the right balance between disclosure and flexibility. The language is tightly integrated with existing securities laws to provide investor protection. It places easily met obligations on the issuer and the intermediary to ensure that investors have the information they need to make sound decisions. The bill has many provisions for appropriate rulemaking and is written in a way that reflects how crowdfunding actually works. And again, this is from a crowdfunding intermediary based out of North Carolina, one that is actually working to occupy this internet space and wants a platform, a structure that works and makes crowdfunding a legitimate strategy for capital formation. The letter continues, we think crowdfunding can be valuable and integral part of capital formation. The Crowdfund Act is the right bill, they're referring to the amendment we're considering today, to make this happen. Or there's Launched. Launched is a crowdfunding portal provider. They say, quote, for the first time, we have a Senate bill with bipartisan sponsorship, a balance of state oversight and federal uniformity, industry standard investor protections, and workable funding caps. Or let's turn to the commentary from the startup exemption, 3 entrepreneurs who have led the charge here in the Capitol for flexible provisions for crowdfunding. Quote, we write to suggest that if you consider the House version, you consider adding the following crucial components. Number 1, crowdfund investing intermediaries that are SEC regulated provide appropriate oversight. Number 2, all or nothing financing so that an entrepreneur must hit 100% of his funding target or no funds are exchanged. And number 3, state notification rather than state registration so states are aware of who is crowdfunding in their states. This ensures they retain enforcement ability while creating an efficient marketplace. These provisions are added in the amendment we are considering, an amendment that they have endorsed. And finally, we have SomoLend, a peer-to-peer lending site. Their commentary, this amendment is, quote, robust enough to provide guidance to a new industry, but will also benefit the crowdfunding industry in the long term, as compared to a possible race to the bottom with a no regulatory approach. The disclosure and regulatory requirements will provide adequate information to investors, advising of risk, but also deterring fraud. Continues, again, this has long-term benefits to the industry as a whole. So this hits at the heart of why these investor protections are so important. Not only do they deter scams and fraud, not only do they protect vulnerable investors such as seniors and others who have little experience in the investing market, but they build a strong capital formation market, a successful platform for capital formation, a market that puts capital where citizens would like to put it, the wisdom of the crowd, if you will, a market that allows good ideas to rise to the top, a market that will create jobs now and in the future. I urge my colleagues to support Amendment 1884 to provide the right balance of streamlining and investor protection. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor. Note the absence of quorum. Yes.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam
The senator from Rhode Island.
Madam President, are we in a quorum call?
Yes, we are.
I ask the call be dispensed with. I ask for unanimous consent to be allowed to speak for up to 1 minute.
Without objection.
Madam President, shortly we'll be voting on my amendment, which will maintain the House's increase in the number of shareholders, 2,000, in order to remain private. But what I do is actually ensure that the shareholders are the real shareholders, that there's not an intermediary that's holding the stock in the name of literally hundreds, perhaps, of shareholders, but it's the real shareholders. There's been some criticism of this amendment about its effect on ESOPs, mutual funds, private funds, and others. We've been assured by legal experts it does not affect any of these funds or entities. In addition, the SEC has assured us that it, through rulemaking, can clarify that ESOPs, mutual funds, private funds, and other entities like this will not be affected. I believe that if a company has 2,000 real shareholders, those shareholders should have access to routine information on a regular basis, and that is the thrust of this amendment.
Under the previous order, all post-cloture time has expired, and the question occurs on the Reid Amendment number 1931. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The noes appear to have it. The noes do have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table. Under the previous order, there will now be 2 minutes of debate equally divided prior to a vote in relation to the Merkley Amendment number 1884. Who yields time?
Madam President,
The senator from Oregon.
do I have a minute?
The senator is correct.
Thank you, Madam President. And colleagues, I want to encourage you to adopt Amendment 1884. The House bill, as it came to us on crowdfunding, is a pathway to predatory scams. It requires no information to be provided by a company. And if the company provides information, it requires no responsibility or accountability for the accuracy of that information. It allows companies to hire people to pump the stocks, which is exactly what we all know from pump and dump schemes is very devastating to any sort of solid financial foundation for capital aggregation, capital formation. I want to applaud my colleagues, Senator Bennett, Senator Landrieu, Senator Brown, who have worked together to bring this bipartisan amendment forward that provides the right amount of streamlining for the companies, the right amount of streamlining for portals on the Internet, and the right set of investor protections, information, and accountability necessary to make crowdfunding fulfill the exciting potential it has. Thank you.
Who yields time in opposition? The time is yielded back. The question is on Amendment 1884. The yeas and nays have been ordered. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Beckidge, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Ohio, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Conrad, Mr. Coons, Mr. Corker, Mr. Cornyn, Mr. Crapo, Mr. DeMint, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heller, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Inouye, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Kerry, Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin, Mr. Lieberman, Mr. Lugar, Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, Mr. Nelson of Florida, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Sessions, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall of Colorado, Mr. Udall of New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Mr. Webb, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Bennett, Bingaman, Blumenthal, Cardin, Casey, Cornyn, Durbin, Hagan, Hutchison, Leahy, Lieberman, Merkley, Murray, Reed of Rhode Island, Schumer, Shaheen, Tester, Udall of New Mexico, and Whitehouse. Senators voting in the negative: Johans, Kyle, and McConnell. Mr. Toomey, no. Mr. Thune, no. Mr. Brown of Ohio, aye. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, aye. Mr. Beckidge, aye. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Conrad, aye. Mr. Wyden. Aye. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Grassley. Aye. Mr. Franken. Aye. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Aye.
Here, down here at the bar, I'm all after the first vote, be 10 votes.
Mr. Vitter. No. Mrs. Boxer. Aye. Mrs. Gillibrand. Aye. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Aye. Mr. Rubio. No. Mr. Burr. No. Mr. No Way. Aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller. Aye. Mr. Alexander. No. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins. Aye. Mr. Lee. No. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Harkin. Aye. Ms. Cantwell. Aye. Mr. Nelson, Nebraska. Aye. Mr. Dement. No. Mr. Manchin. Aye. Mr. Corker. Mr. Corker. Mr. Akaka, aye. Mr. Blunt, aye. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, no.
There's an intermediate process we set up.
Ms. Stabenow. Ms. Stabenow, aye. Mr. Crapo, no. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. Corker, no. Mr. Enzi? Mr. Enzi, no. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Inhofe? Mr. Inhofe, no. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Cochran. Mr. Cochran, aye. Mr. Carey. Mr. Carey, aye. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, aye. Ms. Ayotte, no. Mr. Pryor, aye. Mr. Johnson, Wisconsin, no. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts, no. Mr. Sanders, aye. Mr. Shelby. Mr. Shelby, no. Mr. Coburn, no. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Baucus, aye. Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. McCain, no. Mr. Lugar, no. Ms. Snow, aye. Mr. Webb, no. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Coates, aye. Mr. Heller, no. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, aye. Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Mr. Lautenberg, aye. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Mr. Levin, aye. No. Mr. Menendez? Mr. Menendez, aye. Mr. Isaacson, no. Ms. Mikulski? Ms. Mikulski, aye. Mr. Chambliss, no. Mr. Hatch, no. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Mr. Sessions, no. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Portman, no. Mr. Udall of Colorado, aye. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Graham, no. Mr. Hoeven, no.
Are there any senators wishing to vote or to change their vote? Seeing none, the yeas are 64, the nays are 35. The Merkley Amendment number 1884 is agreed to. Under the previous order, the motion is considered made and laid upon the table.